Rolling hills draped in mist, stone walls weathered by a century of prayers. Mariam's Convent, a sanctuary carved into the landscape like a promise. For generations, it stood as a beacon, a place where the weary found solace, where the lost sought grace. Sunlight streamed through those arched stained glass windows, painting the chapel floor in fractured rainbows. Silence here wasn't empty, it felt sacred, heavy, holy. They called it a haven, a refuge for the forgotten. Orphans, widows, souls adrift. From the outside, perfection, a postcard of piety. Townsfolk would speak of it in hushed, reverent tones. A house of angels, they'd say. But behind those ancient stones, beneath the whispered hymns and the scent of incense, something else festered. A darkness the sunlight never touched. For decades, the silence within those walls didn't cradle peace. It smothered screams. Whispers of suffering dissolved into the cold stone, unanswered. Unheard, or worse, ignored. Because who would dare, who could even conceive, that evil could wear the habit of a saint? Faith built this place, but faith also blinded the world to its rot. Until 1998, until a single letter, stained not with ink, but dried blood, slipped out from behind the convent's iron gates. It carried a secret, a truth so vile, it would shatter the stained glass illusion, shake a trusting town to its core, and rip away the veil of grace to expose the monstrous face hiding beneath. To understand the horror, you must first see the illusion, the perfection. Mariam's Convent wasn't just respected, it was revered. Founded in 1923 by Sister Evangeline, a woman hailed as a living saint, it rose from the hills not just as a building, but as a symbol, a beacon of hope. Its mission? To shelter the abandoned. The orphanage took in children left on doorsteps, in ditches, on the steps of the church itself. It ran a school, fed the poor. Its charity was legendary, and the world repaid that charity with devotion. Locals donated money, land, heirlooms. Generously, gratefully. Politicians pinned medals on the nuns' habits. Newspaper headlines called it a light in the darkness, God's hand on earth. Pilgrims traveled miles just to touch its walls and pray. This wasn't just admiration, it was adoration, a sacred trust. But that trust, that blind, shining faith, became the convent's most powerful weapon. Because behind the postcard image, Mariam's operated like a fortress, a closed world, impenetrable. Visitors? They were received only in the stark, formal parlor. Never beyond, never unsupervised. The children? Their letters home, if they were even allowed to write, were opened, read, censored, or burned. Phone calls? Monitored. The outside world was kept out. The truth was kept in. And when unsettling whispers did escape, when a shopkeeper noticed a girl flinch at a raised voice, or a doctor saw old scars beneath a uniform sleeve, the convent had a ready answer. Discipline. They are molding souls, people murmured. Sister Evangeline's ways are stern, but holy. Any doubt was smothered by the sheer weight of that reverence. To question the convent was to question divine will itself. After all, who would dare accuse God's servants? And so the fortress stood, unchallenged, its walls of faith towering higher than stone, while inside, the darkness grew. For decades, the darkness at Mariam's Convent festered in silence. But silence can't hold forever. Cracks began to show. Small ones, flickers of truth escaping the stone walls. Ignored, buried, until those flickers became flames. It started in the autumn of 1997. Thomas Vale, the groundskeeper, a quiet man who'd tended the convent's gardens for 20 years. He knew the rhythms of the place, the bells, the prayers, the rustle of habits. But one damp October evening, as he locked the tool shed near the old crypt, he heard something else. Crying, not the soft weeping of prayer. This was raw, desperate, the sound of a child choking on sobs. It echoed up from the crypt's iron grate. Thomas froze. The crypt was forbidden, a place for long-dead nuns, not living children. He crouched down, pressing his ear to the cold metal. The crying came again. Weak, terrified. He called out, "Hello? Who's down there?" Silence. Then a whimper. Thomas did what he thought was right. He went straight to Mother Helena, told her what he'd heard. Her face, he'd say later, stayed perfectly calm. Serene. She thanked him for his diligence, assured him it was likely just the wind whistling through the old tombs, or perhaps a cat trapped in the cellar. She promised she'd look into it. He was fired the next morning. No explanation. No final pay. Just a terse note handed to him at the gate by a stone-faced nun. Your services are no longer required. Do not return. His keys taken. His name scrubbed from the records. Thomas tried to tell people in town, but who would believe him over the revered Mother Helena? His story became just another whisper. Dismissed. Forgotten. Then winter came. January 1998. Bitter cold. Sister Agnes brought a small group of older orphan girls into the village for supplies. A rare outing. One girl, maybe 12 years old, stumbled on an icy patch near the bakery. Her sleeve rode up as she caught herself. Elsie Turner, the town midwife, was passing by. Elsie saw it. Bruises. Not the yellow-green fading kind. These were dark purple. Fresh. Angry. Wrapping around the girl's thin forearm like twisted rope. And higher up, peeking above her collar more. Old scars layered under new marks. Elsie's medical training screamed. This wasn't a fall. This wasn't clumsiness. This was repeated violence. She acted fast. While Sister Agnes was haggling over flour prices, Elsie gently pulled the girl aside behind a stack of firewood. Sweetheart, she whispered, who hurt you? The girl's eyes went wide. Panicked. She glanced towards Sister Agnes, then back at Elsie. She just shook her head violently, tears welling. I fell, she choked out. Just fell. But the terror in her eyes told Elsie everything. Elsie didn't hesitate. She went straight to the local police chief. Showed him her credentials. Spoke clearly, firmly, detailing the bruises, the scars, the girl's palpable fear. She demanded an investigation. The chief listened. He looked troubled. He promised he'd make inquiries. He did. He sent a junior officer to the convent the next day. A formality. A courtesy. Mother Helena received him in the pristine parlor. Offered tea. Expressed deep concern. She explained the poor child was prone to sleepwalking. Had fallen down the dormitory stairs again. Such a tragedy. They were praying for her healing. She lamented how fragile these abandoned souls could be. Then she handed the officer a letter. It was on heavy, expensive paper. Letterhead from the diocese. Signed by the bishop himself. It commended the convent's strict but loving discipline and its vital work. It mentioned Mother Helena's unimpeachable character. And it was copied to the chief of police's superior and the mayor and a prominent judge. The junior officer left. The inquiry ended. Elsie Turner was visited by the chief. He was apologetic but firm. There was nothing more to be done. The convent's lawyers, powerful men from the city, had also made contact, hinting at lawsuits for defamation. Against Elsie, against the police department. The truth was buried again, deeper this time, sealed under authority and threat. The whispers were getting louder, but the walls of silence seemed stronger than ever. It felt hopeless, like the convent was untouchable, protected by something darker than stone. Until Maria Rossi. Maria wasn't a child. She was 19, a postulant, a young woman who'd entered the convent full of devotion just 2 years before. But behind the veil, she'd seen things. Horrible things. Things that chipped away at her faith until only fear remained. She knew trying to leave openly was suicide. They'd lock her away, call her hysterical, or worse. So she planned. She stole scraps of paper, wrote in stolen moments, hidden in the laundry, under her mattress, in the shadowed corner of the chapel during midnight prayers. She wrote down everything she'd witnessed, everything she'd endured. She wrote for her brother, Luca, the only person she trusted. January 28, 1998. A frozen night, the coldest in memory. Ice thick on the convent windows. Wind howling like a banshee. Maria waited until the deep watch of the night. She slipped from her narrow bed, wore only her thin nightgown under her postulant's robe. She didn't take shoes. Bare feet made less sound on stone. She ran, through the silent, freezing cloisters, past the chapel where the shadows seemed to watch, heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Every creak of the old building felt like a shout. Every gust of wind sounded like a pursuing nun. She reached the side gate, a small, rusty door rarely used. She'd stolen the key weeks before. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled. Click. It opened. She stumbled out into the blizzard. The icy wind stole her breath. The frozen ground burned her bare feet. She didn't look back. She ran, down the hill, through the skeletal woods, towards the distant lights of the town, driven by pure terror. She carried only one thing, folded tight against her skin, hidden in the waistband of her robe, the letter. Hours later, half dead from cold, Maria collapsed on Luca Rossi's doorstep, frostbite blackening her toes. Lips blue, barely conscious, but alive. She thrust the crumpled papers into his hands before darkness took her. Luca read it, and the world he knew ended. It wasn't just words. It was a scream trapped on paper. It detailed punishments that belonged in nightmares, not a house of God. Children locked for days in tiny, freezing penance rooms with only crusts of bread and dirty water. Beatings with rods for the smallest sins. A dropped spoon, a tear shed, a wandering glance. Beatings for impure thoughts whispered in confession by terrified girls barely old enough to understand what the word meant. And the disappearances. Girls who vanished overnight. Maria named them. Anna, Sophia, Beatrice, little Clara, only 7. Their beds were empty by morning. Their belongings gone. When Maria dared ask, the nuns would say they'd been transferred to a better place or taken in by a blessed family. But there were no records. No goodbyes. Just gone. Erased. The letter ended with a plea. Luca, believe me. Help them. Before they kill me too. And Maria had signed it. Not with ink. She'd pricked her finger. Signed it in her own dried blood. Luca didn't hesitate. He didn't go to the local police. He knew what happened to Elsie Turner. He drove Maria straight to the hospital. Then he drove 50 miles to the regional state police headquarters. He walked in, slammed the bloodstained letter down on the duty sergeant's desk. Read this, Luca said, his voice raw. Then do your damn job. This time they listened. The bloodstained letter was the key, the proof they needed. But the state police knew better than to storm the gates. Mother Helena was protected, connected, so they moved like shadows. Quiet, precise. They needed more, much more. They needed to crack the convent's fortress open from the inside. Their first targets weren't inside the walls, but outside. Women who had escaped. Former nuns and postulants who'd left Mariam's over the decades. Some had fled. Some had been quietly released. All carried scars, not just on their skin, but deep inside. The police tracked them down, scattered across the country, living under different names, working quiet jobs, trying to forget. Most refused to talk. The fear was still too real, the shame too deep. They'd slam doors, hang up phones, break down sobbing at the mention of Mother Helena's name. The convent's hold was that strong, even years later. But the investigators persisted. Patient, gentle. They showed Maria Rossi's letter. They promised protection. Slowly, painfully, the stories began to leak out. A woman named Eleanor, who'd been a novice in the 1970s, described the penance rooms in the cellar. Stone cells. No light. No heat. Buckets for waste. Children locked inside for days for minor sins, speaking out of turn, spilling soup. You could hear them crying through the walls, she whispered, her hands shaking even now. But Mother Helena said their tears washed away sin. Another Marta, who'd worked in the infirmary, recalled girls brought to her with broken bones, burns, deep cuts. She was told they'd fallen. But you knew, she said, her voice flat. Empty. You knew it wasn't falls. The bruises were in the wrong places. The burns too perfect. Like irons, she'd been ordered to falsify medical records. Blame clumsiness. Blame illness. Then they found Sister Agnes. Agnes wasn't her real name anymore. She lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. Her eyes held a lifetime of haunted stillness. She'd been a full nun at Mariam's for almost 20 years. She'd seen everything. Done things. She'd left in 1985 broken. She hadn't spoken a word about the convent since. Until now, the investigators showed her Maria's letter. Agnes traced the blood-stained signature with a trembling finger. She closed her eyes. A tear escaped, then another. She confessed. Not just about the beatings, not just about the starvation. She confessed the why, the twisted heart of it all. They told us sin lived inside the children, Agnes said, her voice a dry rasp. Like a worm in an apple. It was born in them. Their very existence, their pain, their need, it was proof of their impurity. Proof of the world's corruption. Our duty. Mother Helena said it was our holy duty to purge it. Purge it. Through suffering. Through pain. Through breaking their spirits. We were saving their souls, Agnes whispered, the horror of the lie thick in her throat. Even as we destroyed their bodies. Agnes's words were a bomb. They gave the police the motive, the cruel, religious logic behind the torture. But they still needed physical proof. They needed the bodies. The convent sat on sprawling grounds. Orchards, gardens, woods. Rumors had always swirled about the orchard, the oldest part, where the apple trees grew gnarled and thick. Children weren't allowed there. Nuns patrolled its edges. Local kids dared each other to peek through the fence at night, whispering about ghost girls seen between the trees. The police brought in ground-penetrating radar. They waited for a moonless night, moved in while the convent slept. The machine looked like a lawnmower. It rolled slowly over the damp earth beneath the apple trees, sending pulses down, listening for echoes. The screen glowed green in the darkness. Lines scrolling, shapes forming. The technician froze. His face went pale under the dim light of the screen. "My God," he breathed. Beneath the roots of the oldest trees, the radar wasn't showing rocks or tree roots. It was showing shapes, long shapes, small shapes, lined up, row after row after row. Unmarked graves, 27 of them. They got the warrant immediately. Dawn broke cold and gray as the digging began. Forensic teams, white tents going up, the air thick with the smell of turned earth and dread. The first shovels bit into the soil. The first body was found just 3 feet down. A small skeleton, curled like a question mark, wrapped in a rotting shroud of rough convent linen. No coffin, no marker, just dirt. Then another, and another. Most were children, some so small, forensic anthropologists estimated they were as young as 6 or 7. Their bones told silent stories of prolonged suffering. Signs of severe malnutrition, brittle bones, stunted growth. Healed fractures in places you don't break from falling. Skull fractures, ribs snapped long before death. Cause of death? For some, the records Maria mentioned might have said pneumonia, or childhood fever, or simply accident. For others, the convent's own sparse records showed nothing at all, like they never existed, but the convent kept other records. Meticulous ones. Ledgers. Heavy, leather-bound books found locked in Mother Helena's office. Columns of numbers. Donations carefully recorded cash, land deeds, jewelry from wealthy patrons. But then, the money flowed out, to accounts the police traced. The truth was in the payments. Huge sums labeled medical supplies, but no evidence of any significant medicine ever being bought. Building repairs paid to a company owned by the mayor's brother for work never done. Educational materials shipped to a warehouse that didn't exist. And then, the regular payments, monthly sums, disguised as charitable contributions or consultation fees, sent to a local judge, to the police chief's personal bank account, to the editor of the regional newspaper, to a doctor known for signing death certificates without asking questions. It was a map of corruption, silence bought and paid for, the suffering of children turned into profit, the donations meant to feed and clothe orphans diverted, stolen, used to pay off the very people who should have stopped it. This wasn't just abuse. It wasn't just cruelty. This was an enterprise, a cold, calculating business, built on faith, fueled by suffering, protected by greed. The convent wasn't just a house of horrors. It was a machine, grinding up innocence and spitting out money and power for those who ran it, and those who looked away. The fortress hadn't just been cracked. Its rotten foundations were finally laid bare. The graves in the orchard, the ledgers full of lies, the broken women who spoke out. They painted a picture of monstrous cruelty. But the true horror wasn't just what happened inside Mariam's convent. It was how it was allowed to happen. For so long, right under the noses of an entire town, the trial would rip away the last veil. It exposed the heart of the darkness. And its name was Mother Superior Helena. To the world, Helena was a saint. Tall, commanding, eyes that seemed to see into your soul. She radiated a fierce, almost frightening certainty. People felt humbled in her presence, drawn to her strength. Her faith felt unshakable, like a fortress wall. Survivors, even years later, spoke of her voice, deep, resonant, filling the chapel during her sermons. But those sermons, they weren't about love. Not the kind, you know. Agnes remembered Helena pacing the stone aisle, her shadow huge in the candlelight. Suffering, Helena would thunder, is God's purest love. It burns away the filth of this world. It is the fire that forges saints. She'd point a bony finger at the orphans huddled in the pews. See the sin that clings to them? See their weakness? Their pain is a gift, a holy fire to cleanse them. She weaponized the Bible, twisted verses about sacrifice, about bearing crosses, about the purification of suffering. She used God's word like a knife, to justify the beatings, the starvation, the freezing cells. Offer your pain to the Lord. She'd command a sobbing child locked in the dark. Your suffering pleases him. It washes you clean. Her faith wasn't a comfort. It was a whip, a justification for torture. She didn't just oversee the cruelty, she ordained it. Made it holy. For years, that seemed like the deepest evil. One woman, warped by power and perverted belief, inflicting hell on the helpless. But the trial, the cold, hard evidence laid out in that courtroom, uncovered something far colder. Far more calculating. Mother Helena wasn't alone. She wasn't some isolated monster raging in her stone tower. She was the center of a web, a network of silence, of complicity, powerful threads stretching out from the convent walls, wrapping around the town, the county, the very institutions meant to protect the innocent. The ledgers hadn't just shown stolen money. They'd shown payments, regular documented bribes, payments disguised as donations or fees. Dr. Eris Thorne, the town's respected physician, he signed death certificates for children found in the orchard. Pneumonia, childhood wasting disease, accidental fall. He never asked questions, never examined the bodies closely. His signature was cheap, bought monthly by the convent. He swore he suspected nothing. The jury didn't believe him. Judge Elias Vance, a pillar of the community, he presided over the local court. Twice, years before Maria's letter, formal complaints about the convent had reached his desk. Once from a concerned aunt whose niece vanished after entering the orphanage. Once from a former kitchen worker who heard screams. Judge Vance dismissed both. Unfounded rumors, he declared. Slander against the pious. His gavel silenced the questions. His price? Regular consultation fees from the convent's charity fund. Peter Renfield, editor of the County Herald. His newspaper ran glowing features on Mother Helena every year. Angel of the Hills, Saint of the Forgotten. He ignored the fired groundskeeper Thomas Vale. He buried a tip from Elsie Turner, the midwife, about the bruised girl. Why? Because his newspaper received generous donations from the convent. He sold the truth for ink and paper. Even the local police captain before the state police stepped in. His name was in the ledger too. Small payments. 4 extra patrols. Patrols that conveniently never noticed anything amiss at the convent gates. The convent wasn't isolated. It was protected, shielded by a wall not of stone, but of greed and fear. Helena didn't just buy silence, she bought active protection. A safety net woven by the town's most trusted men. They buried inquiries. They discredited whispers. They turned away their eyes. But why? Why would a doctor, a judge, a journalist, a police captain, why would they risk everything? Why protect such obvious evil? The trial uncovered the darkest threat of all. Blackmail. Mariam's convent didn't just take in orphans. It took in secrets. Helena was meticulous. Not just about money, about information. The orphans. Many weren't just abandoned children. Some were the hidden, unwanted offspring of the town's elite. The mayor's teenage daughter, sent away after a scandal. The wealthy banker's mistress, who died giving birth to his illegitimate son. The respected schoolteacher's niece, assaulted by a powerful relative. Shameful secrets. Ruinous if exposed. Helena offered sanctuary, a place to hide the evidence of sin. But it came with a price. A lifelong price. She kept records. Not just financial ledgers. A hidden journal. Names. Dates. The true, scandalous origins of specific children. Letters from desperate parents or relatives pleading for secrecy. Proof. And she used it. When Judge Vance seemed hesitant to dismiss the second complaint, a discreet note arrived, reminding him of the child his nephew had fathered, the child now living in the convent orchard's shadow. When Dr. Thorne wavered over signing one too many questionable death certificates, a quiet mention of the baby girl born to his own sister, hidden away at Mariam's years before. Orphans were perfect pawns, voiceless, powerless, forgotten by the world. Their very existence was a weapon Helena held over the heads of the powerful. Keep us safe, the unspoken threat went, or your secret, your shame, your career, it all burns. This was Helena's true mastery. She didn't just inflict suffering, she traded in it. She harvested the shame of the town's elite and used it to fertilize her own garden of horrors. The cruelty inside the convent wasn't just hidden by the powerful. It was fueled by them. Their secrets paid for the silence. Their fear built the walls higher. Their complicity fed the monster. Mother Helena wasn't just a tyrant within her walls. She was a puppeteer. And the strings she pulled were made of human weakness, greed, and the terrified silence of an entire town. The trial ended. The evidence was laid bare for the world to see. The graves, the ledgers, the broken women, the web of lies and bribes and blackmail. Surely now, justice would come? Surely, the scales would finally balance? They didn't. Mother Superior Helena never faced a jury's verdict. 6 months before sentencing, she was found dead in her prison cell. A heart attack, they said. Quick. Painless. Too quick. Too painless for many. There were whispers. Questions. But the inquiry was brief. Case closed. The architect of the horror escaped earthly punishment. Died a prisoner, yes, but never a convicted one. Never truly branded with the full measure of her guilt. And what of the others? Only 3 junior nuns ever stood trial. Sisters claimed to be following orders. Terrified of Helena, trapped by the convent's walls and its warped faith. The prosecution argued they could have spoken, could have stopped something. The sentences? Probation. Not prison. Probation. For their part in a system that starved children, beat them, buried them in secret. 2 walked free with a warning. The 3rd received minimal supervision. A slap on the wrist for a hand that held a rod. And the rest? The other nuns named in testimony? The ones who administered beatings, guarded the penance rooms, kept the silence? Vanished. Like ghosts. Slipped away before arrests could be made. New names. New countries, perhaps. No trail. No justice. They simply disappeared back into the world they helped poison. What about the dead? The graves in the orchard were exhumed. 27 small coffins, paid for by the state, finally gave those children a semblance of dignity. Names were painstakingly sought. Some families, decades later, finally learned the terrible fate of the child they'd left at the convent's door, hoping for a better life. But half of them, 13 tiny souls, remain unknown. No records matched them. No families claimed them. Just bones in boxes. Numbers on a coroner's report. No one knows their real names. No one knows where they came from. No one knows the sound of their laughter or the color of their eyes. They are ghosts in the truest sense. Erased twice over. Once by the convent, once by time and indifference. And the true number? 27 confirmed. But was that all? Survivors spoke of others. Girls who vanished before the orchard graves were dug. Others who ran away, but were never seen again. How many more lie in unmarked plots in forgotten corners of the grounds? Or worse, we will likely never know. The full toll of Mariam's convent remains a dark, open question. The building itself? It stands empty. Has done for years. The diocese shut it down after the trial. Boarded up the windows. Chained the gates. It looms on the hill now, a crumbling monument to misery. Weeds choke the once manicured gardens. The orchard, where the graves were found, grows wild and thick. Locals avoid the road that winds past it. They call it cursed. They hurry by, eyes averted, as if looking too long might invite the darkness back. Some survivors tried to fight on. Maria Rossi. Others who found the courage. They filed lawsuits. Against the diocese. Against the town officials implicated in the cover-up. They sought compensation. Acknowledgement. Something tangible to prove their suffering mattered. They lost. Technicalities. Statutes of limitations running out. Insufficient direct evidence linking specific officials to specific harms against specific victims. The courts offered sympathy. Empty words. No money. No real accountability for the system that failed them. The fortress of law proved as impenetrable as the convent's stone walls. The diocese? Years later, after the headlines faded, they issued a statement. A formal apology, printed on cheap paper. It expressed profound regret for the painful events that occurred under its watch. It promised vigilance, but no compensation. No funds for therapy for the broken women. No scholarships for the children of survivors. No monument with the names of the dead in the town square. Just words. Words that rang hollow against the decades of screams those same walls had ignored. And the town itself? It never recovered. Oh, life goes on. Shops open. Crops grow. Children play. But something fundamental broke. The trust. The innocence. The postcard image of the charming hillside town is forever stained. Neighbors look at each other differently. Was your grandfather the judge who buried the inquiry? Was your uncle the doctor who signed the false certificates? Did your family have a secret child buried in that orchard? The questions hang unspoken in the air, thick as the hill fog. Because the darkest secret of Mariam's convent wasn't just the torture. It wasn't just the graves. It wasn't even Helena's blackmail. The darkest secret was the silence. The sheer, staggering ease with which the world looked away. The groundskeeper fired? A shrug. The midwife silenced? Unfortunate. The bruises? Ignored? Discipline. The whispers dismissed? Gossip. The judge, the doctor, the journalist, the police, They didn't act in a vacuum. They acted because they knew they could. They knew the town wanted to believe the lie, the beautiful lie of the saintly convent on the hill. It was easier than facing the ugly truth. Looking away wasn't passive. It was permission. Every averted gaze, every dismissed whisper, every donation dropped in the collection plate without asking a single hard question. It was fuel. It built the walls higher. It locked the gates tighter. It buried the screams deeper. Justice? For the victims? For the dead? For the living ghosts who carry the scars? What justice can there be when the architect escapes judgment? When her lieutenants walk free? When half the dead remain nameless? When the system offers apologies but no amends? When the town chooses forgetfulness over reckoning? The only verdict history delivers is that true justice never came to Mariam's hill. Only a hollow echo, an illusion, a stark, chilling reminder of how thin the veneer of civilization can be, and how heavy the price when we choose not to see. The wind sighs through the broken windows of Mariam's convent now. It stirs dust in empty chapels, rustles dead leaves in that overgrown orchard. A monument not to faith, but to failure, to the terrible cost of silence. This place echoes, not with prayers, but with questions. The hardest ones. How? How could this happen? How could it last? The answer lies not just in the cruelty of Helena or the greed of her protectors. It lies in us, in the human tendency to see what we want to see, to trust the symbol, the cross, the habit, the stained glass illusion of holiness, more than the unsettling tremor in our gut. Evil doesn't announce itself with roars or horns. It whispers. It hides behind respectability, behind tradition, behind the comforting lie that they could never. Mariam's convent stands as a brutal lesson. Evil thrives in the silence we gift it. When we choose comfort over curiosity, when we let reverence become an excuse not to question, when we hear a whisper of suffering and dismiss it as discipline, or not our business or too hard to believe, that silence isn't neutral. It's permission. It's fertile ground where darkness takes root. We saw piety and missed the predation. We trusted the symbol and forgot that monsters wear skin, human skin, capable of smiles, capable of quoting scripture, capable of unspeakable acts behind walls built on our own blind faith. Look beyond the symbol. Look to the orchard, not to the unmarked graves, but to the lives they represent. Anna, who loved chasing butterflies in the meadow before the convent walls closed around her, who hummed songs her mother might have sung. Luca, the boy with the crooked grin who could mend a bird's broken wing with gentle hands, hands later broken by the rod meant for sin. Little Clara, only 7, who carried a ragged cloth doll named Sunshine and believed, desperately, that kindness still existed somewhere in the world. They weren't just victims. They were children. They had names. They had laughter that once rang out, now silenced. They had futures stolen, not by strangers in the dark, but by those who stood in the light, draped in the very cloth of protection. Their stolen futures echo in the void they left. So what do we do with this echo? This painful reverberation of trust betrayed? We ask. We must ask the uncomfortable questions, even, especially, when they're directed at the seemingly untouchable. The revered institutions, the powerful figures, the places declared sanctuaries. Where else does blind faith blind us today? What institutions, what leaders, what systems hide behind our assumptions of their inherent goodness? Where are we turning away because the truth is too ugly, too complex, too disruptive to the comforting story we tell ourselves? What sanctuaries hide rot behind their walls? Not just physical convents, but the structures of power, of community, of belief we hold dear. Where is silence being bought? Where are whispers being dismissed? Where are the vulnerable paying the price for our collective desire not to see? Because secrets like Mariam's, they don't stay buried forever. Not truly. They fester. They poison the ground. They wait, not for time to erase them. They wait for the brave, for the Thomas Vallas who listen at the crypt grate, even when it costs them everything. For the Elsie Turners who see the bruise and refuse to look away. For the Maria Rossis who scratch their truth onto stolen paper, who run barefoot through the frozen dark. For the Lucas who slam bloodstained evidence onto a desk and demand, "Do your job." They wait for those willing to dig through the layers of silence, complicity, and fear. To dig not with shovels in an orchard, but with questions, with relentless curiosity, with the courage to challenge the symbol. Mariam's convent is a wound, but its echo doesn't have to be a lament. It can be a warning, a call, a stark reminder that vigilance is the price of compassion. That trust must be earned, not blindly given. That the light we shine into the dark corners isn't disrespect. It's the deepest form of respect for those who cannot speak. So, stay curious. Question the comfortable story. Listen for the whispers beneath the hymns. Stay vigilant. Trust your unease. Look beyond the habit, the title, the symbol. See the human beneath. Hold the light. And never, ever stop digging.